For coming out on a rainy day. Thanks, Representative McConkey. Thank you, Rio. But thank all of you for spending a little bit of time with me this afternoon. Because I think we're out for the sake of our country, and our country's standing in the world, and what we're going to pass on to that next generation. No matter what, we got to make sure that Donald Trump's one-term president.
All right now.
To me, though, it's more than just about beating him. It's soundly rejecting this behavior that he's normalizing. It's the lies. It's the abuse of power. It's dividing this country and our communities by gender, by geography, by nationality. It's the fact that we now expect more out of our preschoolers than we do the President of the United States. And who would have ever thought that we'd get to that point? It's more than just about rejecting him, too, though. It's about actually uniting us. Because as Democrats, we win when we offer something better. When we give people a reason to believe that the government and Washington, D.C. could actually work for them. That they would have a fair shot at a better future. Look, my background, just briefly, raised single-parent household. Only knew that there was a governor's house in town because I delivered newspapers to it as a kid. So I made it literally 4 blocks in life from where I was raised. But I worked my way through college, and I borrowed my way through law school. I'll never forget that day that my wife and I paid off what was $175,000 in today's terms of student debt. But when I was a kid growing up in the early 70s, 90% of 30-year-olds were doing better than their parents were at age 30. Today it's half. 60% of Americans in real terms haven't had a pay increase in 40 years. And you look at 2/3 of the counties in this country, probably including yours, have lost businesses over the last decade. And folks saying I shouldn't have to leave my place of worship or my school or my community just to make a decent living. When you go from delivering newspapers to the governor's house as a kid to now getting to raise my 3 kids in it with my wife, you've had that shot at the American dream. But so many people in this country no longer have. And it's gotten even that much worse over the last 2.5 years. I mean, so many people in our communities of color never had that shot. That dream's been denied every step of the way. Think about it, the last 50 years, women still making about 78 cents on the dollar to men. Or millennials struggling with college debt. That American dream's being deferred. If you're an immigrant, after the last 2.5 years, that dream's becoming derailed. If you're a factory worker, if you're a farmer, if you're a shopkeeper, if you're somebody with only a high school degree in this economy, that American dream is becoming more and more destroyed. So yeah, it's about beating Donald Trump, but it is about making people think the government could actually work for them. That we could actually make sure to have a quality access to affordable health care. That we can send every one of our kids to a good public school where she could reach her God-given potential. That we can make college affordable without recognizing 2/3 of the people in this country don't even have a college degree. And what are we going to do for them along the way? And we can create good green jobs. We'll actually finally address our climate and clean up the cesspool of money and politics in D.C. And I think that we can do that. Now, first though, look, I'm a single issue voter, and I know how many of you are single issue voters in one way or another. I'm a single issue voter this time, and that's beating Donald Trump. No matter what, that's beating Donald Trump. 2016, I was the only Democrat in the country to get reelected in a state where Trump won. He took Montana by 20. I won by 4. 25 to 30% of my voters voted for Donald Trump. And you know what? The path to victory doesn't just run through our urban areas. And it doesn't just run through the coasts. If we can't win back places that we lost, we're not going to win this election. And this is about the White House, but it's also about your state house. A third of your counties voted Obama, Trump. And you see the impacts. Representative McConkey sees the impacts every time he goes to Des Moines. As you're getting your education funded, as you privatize Medicaid, as you're getting rights stripped away from you. Look, I know you get a lot of visitors from out of state about this time, and they try to make some connection to Iowa. So I didn't even tell you that my great-great-grandparents settled in Henry County in 1850. Didn't tell you that my mother was born in Ottumwa. Both are true. Because you also get all these folks making promises to you. So here's a promise you can take to the bank. If I'm the nominee, I will win Massachusetts, California, Vermont, I'll throw in Delaware. Any Democrat with a pulse will win those states. Literally anyone. But it's got to be places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. And I refuse to see the votes of rural America, folks that actually work the land, feed the world, pass the plate on a Sunday, are forever wedded to this lying con man from New York with gold hair, orange hair, and a gold toilet. We need to be able to connect in the rural areas as well if we're going to win this election. I'm a pro-choice, pro-union, populist Democrat that actually won 3 elections in a red state, not by compromising values, but by getting stuff done. My legislative composition, it is more Republican than yours in Iowa. And it's about 60% Republican now. That's the best it's been in my 7 years as governor. But even with that, right, we've been able to do things like expand Medicaid without privatizer, providing health care for another 100,000 Montanans. We have physical health, mental health parity. We've kicked dark money out of our elections. We have record investments in our K-12 system, first-time investments in pre-K. We have the 4th lowest college tuition and fees in the nation by actually freezing college tuition, investing more into higher education. And I've also made sure that recognizing not everybody's going to go to college. So our 2-year colleges, and we have 7 tribal colleges, are about apprenticeships and work-based learning. So folks can climb that ladder into the middle class. As a result, people are at a higher rate in Montana than any state in the country. Been able to do that by certainly trying to find common ground, but that doesn't mean we have to compromise those core values that we held. More vetoes than any governor in the history of Montana, by quite a bit. Stopped every attempt to take away a woman's right to make her own health care decisions.
All right.
Because that shouldn't be the legislature's. 25 states have actually made it harder to vote just over the last few years. We still have same-day registration, no excuse absentee voting. We've protected access to the courthouse for injured workers so that our lawyers can actually do their work. We've kept our public lands in public hands, stopped every attempt to roll back environmental protections. And before I got into all this stuff, I was a union-side labor lawyer representing the Teamsters. That's a Teamster right there. There's Teamsters, IBW, and our teachers' unions. And we're still a state where you can organize and collectively bargain for better wages and better working conditions. How I've been able to win and how I've been able to govern are much the same. Never forget when we were trying to get Medicaid expansion through. This was in 2015 for the first time. This was the heart of the anti-Obamacare time. And went to this town called Choteau, Montana. And Choteau is about 1,700 people on the Rocky Mountain front. Like literally, I went up for this meeting. Everybody in town knew why I was going to be there because the Koch brothers were nice enough to mail every household a picture of Barack Obama and Steve Bullock, and our cheeks were actually touching. Wow. And it said, Bullock and Obama are coming to your community to show your healthcare system. Jesus. But I showed up anyway, right? Instead of just saying, here's what you need, I listened. First guy that got up and spoke was the hospital administrator. Because 43% of the people who walk through these doors don't have health insurance for his hospital. A few got up afterwards. They called me an Obama-loving this and a communist and all this. But probably the fifth or sixth speaker, he was the chair of the county commission, your county supervisors. And he was an old rancher. He wasn't even from Choteau. He was from a town called Bynum, population 50, kind of a suburb of Choteau, right? But he got up and he goes, folks, I was born in this hospital. This hospital saved my life 2 years ago when I had a heart attack. And if we lose this hospital, this town's gone. So instead of me telling them what they need, them talking about their values, that's what gave that Republican legislator the courage to defy the Koch brothers, defy party leadership, vote when every single vote mattered. I begin from a premise that most people's lives, I don't care if it's a presidential candidate, they're too frantic to even care that much about politics. They're more worried about, is my kid going to get sick? Is my car going to break down? But the values that we hold are much the same. We want a safe community. We want a roof over our head. We want a decent job. We want clean air and clean water, good public schools, the belief you can do better for your kids and grandkids than even yourself. If we campaign on those values, because if somebody's about their education interests, their economic interests, their healthcare interests, they ought to be with us along the way. Look, I am the only governor left in this race, and I haven't been on every debate stage.
Lucky him.
Yeah, maybe. You know, in some respects, it's because I had a job to do. I talked about how I got Medicaid expansion through. Then we had to reauthorize it, and we chose to do it by ballot initiative. And in 2018, tobacco companies spent $26 million killing that ballot, that Medicaid expansion reauthorization. So I had to work with my legislature that's more Republicans than yours in Iowa to get this through. Signed my last bill on a Monday. I announced on a Tuesday. By Thursday, this was mid-May, I was here in Iowa. And in some ways I got in too late to play the DNC debate games, because what kind of happened along the way more than anything is the biggest threshold was individual $1 donors. And you had campaigns spending somewhere between $60 and $80 online to get that $1 donor. Couldn't do that. Now, if it comes to saving healthcare for 100,000 people or getting 100,000 donors, easiest decision I'd ever make. But I also turn around and say, that's not what decides these elections. I'll be darned if you don't decide these elections.
Right.
Think about it. John Kerry, 45 days out from Iowa, was at 4%. Al Sharpton was beating him. He won Iowa. That changed it all the way along. If we go back to 2007, Hillary Clinton was above Barack Obama by 22 points right now. It was Iowans that made the decision how this would look. There are 105 days, not that I'm counting, between now and Congress. So there's still a lot of time along the way for you all to make that decision. Look, I think Montana could teach what we've been able to do, could teach DC a lot. I know many of you think Montana is just a small populated state somewhere out there. Well, we got larger population than states like Vermont or Delaware, just to think about for a minute. But I also think if you can't address what's holding Washington back in so many ways, and that really is the corrupting influence of money in the system, everything else that Democrats are talking about through this primary are going to be that much harder. Think about it. Lindsey Graham literally said, we got to get these tax cuts through to make our donors happy. Same time that 43% of Americans would not have $400 in their pocket if their car broke down or they faced a medical emergency. Or we pay more for prescription drugs than any country in the world. Costco can negotiate prescription drugs, but it's against the law for the federal government to do it. We've replaced an entire generation of workers with contract workers. At the same time, union membership is half of what it was in 1980.
Yep.
And you know what? Oil companies are doing pretty darn good.
Oh, yeah.
And the Republican Party is the only significant political party in the world that does acknowledge that climate change is real.
Yeah.
All of that goes back to the side of money in politics. If we can't do something about that, it's going to be that much harder to do anything. I believe we can do it. I've seen it done before. Look, I was Attorney General before I was governor. I served with your AG, Tom Miller. Actually, almost anybody alive anymore has served with your AG, Tom Miller. But I'm so pleased when I got into this that General Miller endorsed me. But I was AG when this case called Citizens United came up.
Uh-oh.
And that's the case that said corporations are people and money is speech. Remember when that case came down? Every state in the country said there's nothing more that you can do. Democrats actually controlled both House of Congress and the presidency at the time.
Oh, yeah.
And folks talked about it. They raised money off of it, but they didn't do a darn thing. Montana had this dark history of corporate control over our elections. There were these wealthy copper barons, we call them the Copper Kings, that controlled every local, state, and federal office, to the point that it was even known beyond Montana. Mark Twain talked about one of them. He goes, William Clark, he buys politicians, like most people buy food. Corruption no longer smells offensive in Montana. And in the early 1900s, even in the newspapers said the greatest living issue confronting us today is whether the corporation shall control the people or the people shall control the corporations. So regular folks said enough's enough. They passed by initiative this law that said corporations couldn't spend or contribute in our elections. And we also have, I think, the second lowest contribution limits in the country. So I'll be darned if elections in Montana for 100 years was mostly about this. Actually, people talking to people. Recognizing that on election day, your voice is more important than any other corporation or anybody else. So when Citizens United came down, I knew I had to do something. Actually, I took the first case up as Attorney General to the U.S. Supreme Court after Citizens United. We built a faction record where I even had former statewide Republican officeholder saying what the threat of just this spending could do to what happened in our state house. I was so excited. I was younger at the time. I was idealistic. 5-4 decision. U.S. Supreme Court threw out what would 100 years of Montana history. Taught me two things. One, don't ever doubt what one justice can do when it comes to our democracy, workers' rights, women's rights, environmental protections. But it also taught me, if this is at the core of all the other progress we could make, you can't give up. So I went back to my legislature, which was about 2/3 Republican at the time. We passed this law that said, I don't care if you call yourself Americans for America, whatever it is, 90 days out from an election, you have to disclose all the money that you spend in your elections. When I forget, I'm running for re-election in 2016, and about 93 days out, Americans for Prosperity, the Koch-funded group, they mailed our state so well that it even showed up at the governor's residence. And my 3 kids are looking at this and saying, Dad, are you really that much of a creep? But then on day 90, it stopped. It stopped, and if we can stop them there, we can stop them everywhere in the country. I rolled out this idea that seemed kind of crazy to some people, but it's like, we send like our elected officials to Washington. And how about just half the time they're there, they have to focus on doing their job? So let's imagine a U.S. Senator. There was a study of last Congress. 1.5 million hours were spent by members of Congress raising money. So imagine a U.S. Senator goes to Washington, D.C. For the first 3 years, he or she can't even open a campaign for re-election, can't raise money. How would that time be spent? Maybe actually listen to voters. Maybe going to committee meetings. Maybe actually building relationships with other members of Congress, even some across the aisle. In Montana, the minute I'm done with an election, I have to actually get rid of my campaign account. I have to give the money away to charity or others. What would happen if folks didn't have those huge war chests from the beginning? We can do things to make Washington, D.C. work for us again. I fundamentally believe it. Now, this is the most important election of my lifetime. Everyone running for office has said this is the most important election of their lifetime. But I think this time's true. Because it's more than about Donald Trump. It's about a 243-year experiment in representative democracy that is so being challenged right now. Every one of the norms that we believe in are being challenged. America's standing in the world is being challenged. Look, we need to be able to win back places that we lost. We need to be able to give people a reason to vote for us, not just against him. We need to make people believe that government can work. I believe that we can do that. I'm an optimist, right? 3 kids still in 2 teenage daughters. So you gotta be optimistic. But more than that, that's who we are as Americans. We know we're actually at our best when all voices can be heard, not when we're divided into these warring camps, and when civility can replace some of the hostility and anger, and that where no matter who you are, where you're from, you actually believe that you have that shot at a better life than your parents had. And we can be that country again. It all starts in about 105 days. Like I've spent enough time here. I'll never, even though my great-great-grandparents settled here, and my mom was born in Pottawattamie, and my grandma and grandpa went to college in Mount Pleasant, I'll never pretend that I'm an Iowan, but I think I've learned in about 80 stops something about Iowans. And I call it Iowa nice.
Uh-oh.
Like, you take this, you don't take all these candidates as an entitlement. You take it as a sincere obligation. Like, you have to do something to figure out, because not everybody gets the access that you all do.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
But Iowa nice is you're somewhere on my list, Governor. Well, is your list 25 or is your list 3?
Uh-oh.
I ask you, I'm 4. That means I'm 4th right now. I've learned
Just means you're in the top 4.
top 4.
Yeah.
I asked you to put me on the list. The higher, the better, from my perspective. Because also one of the deep secrets that none of us tell you. We love you to death until February, and then we leave. And then you're stuck, and Representative McConkey's stuck with whoever's at the top of the ticket. Is that going to help? Is it going to hurt? I think that I can do something that can not only beat Donald Trump, but help you take back your state house. So appreciate you all coming out here. I'd be willing to answer almost any question. Woo!
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
For your 81st time. And you're really good about your answers and your plans for our pension plan and keeping them stabilized, and that's really awesome. But what would you and a Bullock administration do to make it easier for new unions to be formed?
Yeah, and I'll go a little bit longer and then talk a little bit about unions. So I mentioned, like, before I got into public office, right, I was a union side labor board. So the stories that my kids grew up with were the stories of cases that I had. Like a guy named Dave. David worked at the Billings landfill for 15 years. Then he got passed over for a job because he couldn't read so well, even though, like, reading had nothing to do with the job. And I'll never forget, halfway through an arbitration, we go out to lunch. And he's frustrated because he had been beat up. And he goes, you know what, lawyer, if I could read so well, I'd be sitting where you are right now. But I put 2 kids through college at this garbage dump, and I'm damn proud of the work that I've done. Mm-hmm. And we've got to make sure that we do keep people damn proud of the work that they've done. And when now there are twice as many independent contractors than union members, you can tell that it has been a wholesale assault on the right to organize and collectively bargain. So I think some things, and candidly, DC's talked about it, even under Democrats, they haven't necessarily walked that walk. I've walked that walk. So, Employee Free Choice Act. Mm-hmm. So we could just do card check. Getting to the point of sectoral bargaining. Doing things that you can't interfere through social media and others in organizing campaigns. And we got to get a National Labor Relations Board that actually works for workers again.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I think that there are things, even with works councils and other things, like if you opened up Section 8A2, the National Labor Relations Act, that you could actually do to get more employee involvement.
Yeah.
But it really is that we can't just, and it's not just union members. Like, right, when I say 60% of Americans haven't had a pay increase in 40 years, I'll be darned if it's not at the same time where union membership is dropped by half. So it's not just for the union members, it's for everybody that helps raise the middle class's wages along the way.
Unions built the middle class.
They did. Well, they gave us weekends and stuff like that. But it's also folks that aren't even members of a union, then their wages can go up as a result of what becomes the competitive market. So you'll definitely have a friend of labor, because that was my experience before I even got into this stuff in the White House. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
2 things.
Two
Barack
things.
Obama spent 8 years digging out of George W. Bush's recession.
Yeah.
Are you afraid that Trump is burning down the economy? And secondly, impeachment, yes or no?
So, number 1, yes. And, you know, it's interesting in some respects because, like, if we actually looked at wage growth, it's been slower under Trump than it has under the last 2.5 years of Obama.
Sure.
And-
Gets minimum.
And you turn around and say, yeah, look, unemployment's the lowest it's ever been. There's a lot of jobs, but guess what? People are working 2 and 3 jobs along the way. And whoever has to clean up after this paid more in taxes because of the Trump tax loans. They weren't a tax cut because our kids are gonna have to pay those off if we don't fix something right now. They paid more in taxes than 60 Fortune 500 companies. So I am worried about both what he's done along the way, and I'm also worried about then Democrats are gonna have to clean it up where at some point, you know, and it's, look, every year I've had to figure out a way to balance a budget. Now, not promising you to come into DC and deal with, all of a sudden the budget would be balanced, but if we're not looking at what we're going to be handing to that next generation a little bit, if we're talking about here are all the programs we'll give you without ways to actually provide the revenue, I think that's a challenge. Impeachment, it's interesting, you know, so through the Mueller report and through all of that, probably in 65 stops in Iowa, no one ever asked me a question about impeachment. They asked about, worried about losing the rural hospitals. They asked about what's happened with education funding. And I would so much rather not make the next 1.5 years about impeachment. But as former Attorney General, that I am, as a lawyer, Ukraine, at that point, I said, I don't know if this is the best thing to happen politically. And I don't know. But I think that we have to move forward with the full inquiry.
Oh, yes.
And politics, I don't know if it'll work, but we best one person in our country to be the spokesperson with other heads of state. And that's something the Congress can't overturn.
No.
So I think it has to go forward. Look, this guy's got to be removed one way or the other. The other thing that we got to recognize, though, too, is that removed from the ballot, I mean, there's probably 30% of America right now that thinks, oh, he didn't even say anything about Biden, the president of Ukraine. Even if you read the transcript. We finally put up, you could go to DonaldTrumpUkraine.com. My campaign put up a website to say, look, actually read the transcript. Read the stuff. Like, forget Fox News. But we got to recognize, no matter what, there's going to be deep, deep divisions in this country after this guy's out. And we've got to figure out ways to finally heal those divisions.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure where you stand on healthcare in terms of a Medicare for all or universal or continuing what we've got. So I'd be curious to know that. But my concern is the false narrative that's out there that people have choice in their healthcare at this time. That people are picking their insurance products, or people get to pick their doctor and keep their doctor. And the reality is most insurance is picked by your employer, and you get a choice of employers A product or B product.
Well, if you're rich, you do.
Yeah, right. You know, if unions survive, they might negotiate.
Yeah.
But the question is, how do you envision either giving people access to all choices, universal, or putting true medical choices into the hands of people?
Yeah, and let's, two things, one of which we are the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have everyone have access to affordable care. And also that I believe that the biggest step that we actually took toward getting there since Medicare was Affordable Care Act.
All right now.
And so my view of the best way to get to access and affordability for everyone is to get a public option. So a Medicare buy-in to compete against the market, to negotiate 17% of the costs are prescription drugs. Like the notion that we can't even negotiate prescription drug prices is insane.
Yes.
In out-of-network charges, surprise medical billing, start working on payment reform, because what we do is we pay and compensate for repeated tests, not for actually value in keeping people healthy. And I get there's great depth and differences within the Democratic Party. I don't think the best way to go there would be to say there's there's no more, 165 million people that have employer-sponsored care, even if it doesn't provide all the choices, all of a sudden that's gonna be gone tomorrow. So I think we can get there. It won't be, even having a Medicare buy-in that can compete, I think will help, because if it's less expensive than others, that's where folks will go. But I think we also have to look at how much are we gonna disrupt people's lives and what it'll, at the end of the day, cost.
How many more people will you be able to insure though? I
Well-
think that would help.
Well, there's, in point of fact, there's about 25 million people in this country that have zero insurance. Over half of them would be covered, and they're the working poor if Medicaid expansion was in the other 22 states.
All right.
And then the other 12 million, if you could even buy into an exchange product and provide brief subsidy or automatically enroll so many of them that would already be qualified, would be covered. So the coverage part, I don't think we're that far off. The cost part, still we really are a ways off on.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. That'll get you, sir.
Yeah, I am a candidate here in town for the Pasco School Board.
Boy,
Hey.
that's a much more difficult job than being governor. Go on.
So obviously, funding for public schools is a big concern for me and many people, I think, in our community. Right now, our community is looking at like a $1.9 million shortage this year.
Yeah.
So what, from a federal standpoint, because most of our funding comes from state level, what from a federal standpoint would you do in your administration?
Yes, so over 90% of the money for our K-12 system actually comes from either the state and local level.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, I was running for re-election in 2016, and the campaign against me was, Bullock, you blew up the budget. You're just a crazy big government spender. I'm like, well, it's actually fewer state employees today. But all 40% of all increases went into actually funding our K-12 system, increasing that funding because it's so essential. I think that the federal government can do more. What I've proposed is essentially on the federal side, what the U.S. Department of Education does, I would double that amount of money. So that would provide substantially more toward Title I. And then Title I, we have to look at how it's used to make sure that everybody, we're doing some equalization along the way. I don't think that the federal government, because we've done carrots and sticks along the way, and unfortunately, like one good carrot was trying to get universal pre-K, which 90% of a child's brains develop before they even enter into kindergarten. If you're not kindergarten ready, half likely to be grade level by third grade. If you're not at kindergarten, or grade level by third grade, 4 times more likely to drop out of high school. So I think the federal government should actually say, we are going to have universal access to a quality pre-K program. Double my investments in K-12, and then also address some issues like childhood hunger. Because if 20% of kids are dealing with food insecurity issues, if you can't even think about, where your next meal is, it's hard to care about math. And the IDEA, Individual with Disability Education Act, that when it was passed, Congress said, all right, we'll fund 40% of the overall obligation. They've never been above 12 or 13. So fully fund IDEA, double our investment through Department of Ed at K-12, do some work on childhood hunger, do some also work, because there's often disparity rural versus urban, even in teacher recruitment. We have a plan at cbullock.com that even talks about then, so trying to provide incentives in rural areas, but also, we have a West Point, we have a Coast Guard, we have to elevate teaching. The federal government should actually have a teachers academy that people could go free and bring some of our best and brightest.
Good idea.
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you.
No, thank you.
I'm a big environmentalist, but that's not my question. No, I have a very serious question. A lot of cities across the United States, they're knocking down these low housing for low-income people.
Yes.
So they build high-rises, townhouses. Where in the hell are these people supposed to go? You get these companies coming in buying trailer courts.
Mm-hmm.
The first damn thing they do is
No, yeah.
You know, there's gotta be something, where are we gonna put all these, where everybody's gonna live on the street?
Well, and that's, so affordable housing has several different facets, one of which is, right, if you haven't had a pay increase in 40 years, housing prices aren't staying, they're going higher and higher and higher, especially then in our urban areas. But also then the federal commitment when it comes to subsidized housing has been decreasing. And Ben Carson, the current HUD director, basically wants to get rid of it. So I think that the federal government, again, can't do everything, but both with community development block grants and the money that they can provide in, can help make sure that you have affordable housing in your communities. And it takes the commitment of the local community as well. I mean, the federal government's not gonna be able to solve all of this, but we have to be able to incentivize the opportunities. And they also did something that hasn't quite been figured out correctly with these opportunity zones, figured out ways to get tax dollars into areas, especially low-income areas. Well, houses are where jobs go to sleep at night. Like, if you don't have a house, you're never gonna be able to have a solid stability for income. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a retired psychiatric nurse, and one of the problems with psychiatry is, first of all, nobody wants to pay for it, because people don't get well. It's not like an infection. It may go on for years, and you may need treatment for years.
Yeah.
One of the problems we have in Iowa and elsewhere in the United States is a lack of psychiatric beds.
No, that's right.
And, you know, you might have somebody that's suicidal, might be psychotic, and they're sitting in a room in the emergency
No, that's right.
department, not just for hours, but for days. What can the federal government do about that?
And-
Because the states aren't doing crap.
Or at least Iowa's not doing crap.
Neither's Nebraska.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting in as much as because also the hospitals are ill-equipped for that as well. And that was even with, I took drug settlement dollars as Attorney General and helped local communities build secure care facilities along the way. You know, I think in part it's reimbursements and incentivizing because it really, so you have a number of different issues too, right? You don't have psychiatric care in a lot of rural areas, and then you have no facilities. And more than anything, I think that we've got to recognize in this country that there will be times where you need to invest in rural areas at a different rate than in urban areas, just because that keeps the vitality of the community. I mean, with 20% of rural hospitals at risk of closing right now. Or you think about what you all have done with your Medicaid program. I mean, you've privatized. In Montana, we also cover vision, dental, and we haven't lost one rural hospital the whole time we've had it because we're paying at a rate that keeps it open. So I think the federal government can recognize exactly what you've seen is that you need facilities, urban and rural. Pay some money through the Department of Public Health and Human Services, or HHS, and then try to have reimbursement rates that will actually cover the individuals as well.
And then one of the problems is that addictions are mental illnesses, but they're not recognized as such by treatment.
Yeah, and one of the, I knew, or I know, once we got a robust Medicaid expansion passed, 100,000 people have care, but 30,000 of that 100,000 have gotten mental health treatment. I know that 10,000 have gotten substance use disorder treatment. Folks that otherwise would not have gotten care, were we not? And that's what gets them to a productive place. Other questions? I'll get Charlie, then I'll get back to Tim. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, what do you think is the most pressing issue that's faced us today? I mean, if you're anything like me, I mean, I'm afraid for Republic the way things are going. And I guess what comes up, what would your first day of being a president be like? What would be on your
I'll answer that in a couple different ways. It's interesting, when I announced, I was asked this question of, like, what's the biggest threat facing this country? And I think that they wanted me to say Iran or Russia and I hadn't thought about it enough. I said the biggest threat facing this country is ourselves, right? Both how divided we are and what's happened. We've got to figure that out along Now, to get so many of the domestic policies taken care of, day one is certainly addressing money in our system. I'm the only state in the country that I did an executive order that said if you want to contract with the state of Montana, I can't tell you you can't spend, but you have to disclose all the different ways you're trying to spend or contribute to impact our elections. Like, think if the federal government did that on everyone, because they contract with dang near every company in the country. Right, if elected officials are gonna be kind of like NASCAR, well, at least we need to know. So I do think that that is the core of so many, like I have a day one plan for climate. There are things that we could do in a lot of areas. That though, for the health of it all, I think that that's what, one of the things that we need to do. But secondarily also, and this may not, so I'll tell a story I often close with. So when I got elected governor, my kids were 6, 8, and 10. They'd been the youngest in 40 years in this governor's race, that's right. So we move into the governor's house, and my son kicks a soccer ball, it bounces off his paintings. That painting's worth $200,000. I'm like, take down all the damn paintings, right? Because we have to live here. First state of the state I had, that we were so deeply divided. My legislature was 2/3 Republican. And I got up and, I said, you're going to hear some different sounds from the governor's office and the governor's residence. And that's the sound of young kids. And I said, we as elected leaders have to recognize that our kids learn from our words and our deeds. And I said then, our kids are watching. And I believe that more true today than ever before. At some point, we're going to have to say, what are we providing to give them to aspire to and be inspired by? We got a lot of big issues. Income inequality is a huge issue that we have to address. Climate is a huge issue. We have money in politics. And all of it, and we have to do it ultimately in a way for a lot of these issues where I don't care how good we think we are, it's not going to be able to be done just by Democrats alone. So we've got to figure out a way to bridge some of these divides and elevate the overall system. And I think we can do that.
Governor, we have time for
one. You're it. Just because
I know.
I wanted to make a comment, the comment being, when you are elected president, what we have to do is we have to elect the people who are going to support you. But part of what has to happen, I see a lot of people here who are more my age than youth.
You're 50.
And I just, a couple of weeks ago, I spent with my granddaughter and my son's future wife, and they didn't know, they couldn't name 8 people who were running for president on the Democratic ticket. And I was just, and one of those is an educator, so I was just appalled. So we need, as those older people, to be talking to the youth about who's running. We need to be talking to them about what the issues are, how they feel about those issues, because the candidates can't do it all.
Yeah, that's true.
And just like, they hear the big candidates, the blah, 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 the loud, instead of the logic. And so, how would you address the youth and the millennials that it's not getting to?
Yeah, if 18 to 30 voted at the same level as 55 or 60 up, that they would decide every election, right?
Wow.
And the problem is that often that they don't think that any of this matters. And I do worry at times that what can inspire them is something that may not be attainable, to be honest. That, look, we got to do something about college costs. I have a plan for college costs. Plan for college affordability. I don't know that it's realistic that we'll just say everything is free going forward. And most folks don't want everything free, they just want a fair shot. Being able to demonstrate how government can improve their lives and their voice matters. A tangential story just because it's fun. So the FCC repealed net neutrality, right? And I'll never forget, I'm sitting in my office and through the front receptionist, we go, Governor, your 16-year-old daughter's on the phone. Pick up the phone. Yeah, she had my cell phone. I'm like, hey, Caroline. She goes, Governor. And you know you're in trouble with your 16-year-old daughter. And she goes, I go, what's up? She goes, well, I just got off the phone with my senator and Congress office. They were all at school. I'm really worried about net neutrality. What are you going to do about it?
Oh my God.
And at first my response was, look, honey, I'm the governor. I can't do anything about it. But then the only thing worse than like disappointing a constituent is so we started thinking about it, and I wrote an executive order that said, if you want to sell internet services to the state of Montana, you actually have to preserve, you can't block or throttle, you have to preserve net neutrality for all Montanans. Now, Montana, I get, is important. It's not the market maker for the entire nation. So then we put that out and encouraged other governors to sign it. The next day, 2 tiny states called New York and New Jersey adopted it. So the part is recognizing what their concerns are, but then also figuring out ways that you can deliver on those concerns, not just with false promises. And I think that's part of the way that we can get folks engaged along the way. So appreciate you coming out, spending some time. I think I'll have a little bit of time afterwards. So appreciate you giving me, so far, number 4 on your list. I need to keep...
In the top.
Oh, top 4. I always take that as, because you'd say in the top 3 if you had it down. But I know, look, we've got 105 days, as I said. I have something that I think could not only beat Donald Trump, not only help make sure that your legislature gets a little bit into a better position than it is, but also hopefully bridge some of these divides and get things done. Sure appreciate you being out there. Thank you.